coming home, eating dinner, going to bed, getting up, there's got to be more than just a routine of life. Now, don't get me wrong. The routine of life helps to enhance relationships. I was asked to perform a funeral this week, and it was funny because I was called in for Southern Heritage to do the funeral, and so when I get there, I didn't get a chance to talk to the family before. I tried to call them, didn't get in touch with them, stuff like that. And so usually that's where I get a lot of information. But when I walk in, I see some childhood friends there. I see people that I knew from the church, and this guy growing up in the area, and James knows him, and I'm just like, so I'm walking out, I see a lot of people there, and so I'm grateful for all my life in those experiences, those relationships. And again, Seth, when we eat breakfast in the mornings, and I'm taking him to class, and down at the co-op, he says, "Dad, you just know a lot of people, don't you?" I was like, "Yeah, that's okay. I like that." So life is about a lot of things, not just the getting up, going home, going to bed. But when it's 1978, when I told my parents, I said, I assumed, and I didn't know any better. I said, if I'm going in the ministry in the Cumberland church, I need to go to Bethel. Okay? And that's what I assumed. I assumed everybody had to go to Bethel. Well, you don't, but I didn't know any better, but that's the way God was using all this. And to get an undergraduate, you can get an undergraduate anywhere, but I really felt God was calling me. And it was one of those times when you have those, what I call those transformative moments. And it's a time where God is in the middle of something here. You can't really explain it all, but God's doing something. I was walking after Mom and Dad left the campus 5 hours away from home. I told Mindy the other day, I understand every time our boys leave and she tears up, I understand because I read some letters that my mom had written me when I was at college. And I understand her now, and more. But I remember when they were walking away, 5 hours away from home, never been away from home in my life like this, and 5 hours away, they dropped me off and had all my stuff in the room. My first roommate was named Dudley. I was like, okay. Never had a roommate as the only boy. I had my own room and stuff, so it was a whole different change. But I was walking those front doors of that dormitory, and I really had never really heard, I'd heard a little bit of the Lord, but I remember very specifically hearing, "Donny, you're 5 hours away from home. You can be whatever you want to be here, but I hope you choose me." That was that clear, because I still remember this day, those glass doors, and I was about to walk in and said, "You can be whatever you want to be, but I hope you choose me." And I was like, wow. And I didn't understand how that was going to unfold in the days ahead and how the Lord just had things set up just perfectly. But in those transformative moments, because after he spoke to me and I realized that all those years of growing up and being in church and being around church and having the Sunday school teachers, the preachers, and the different ones that impacted my life, it was time for me to stand alone on my own. I don't think it compares anything to what God was doing to Abraham. Abraham, God told him, he says, "Now, Abraham, I am calling you out." Woo! The first one in my family, well, my cousin, she went to college and got a nursing degree, but the first one in our family to go to college. Never been anybody in the ministry. My grandfather had this call. I believe he turned it down. My grandfather, Big Daddy Smith, when he was 12, 13 years old, he had a call to go to the ministry. His mother was not a Christian. She came up, saw him reading the Bible. She took it out of his lap, said, "I never want to see you reading this again." Shame. That's what the story I heard. I don't know that for sure, but when he was a young man, that was taken out. Never did return back to that call. I don't believe that God takes calls back from families. I believe that once they're in the family, they stay in the family. They'll resurface. If a generation rejects it, they'll resurface, and they'll come back. There is a priestly order somewhat in that. I don't know exactly why, but there's an anointing that happens in all of this. I've talked to many of people sitting at a bar, and when I'm witnessing to them, and they're going, "I feel like I was called to the ministry." And they missed it, but they ended up being somewhere else. Abraham, when he was called, he said yes. There was something that was transformative in that moment when God called him out. He says, "Abraham, I'm going to do something different with you." He will do that to every one of us in our life. There's those moments that he'll come and he'll speak to you. He says, "I want to do something different. Are you listening?" That's a hard one to do. Because I know in 1978, when I looked at those dorms and I looked at Bethel University, it was in nowhere town. They had a Burger Queen and a Q-Mart. I left Birmingham for that. 200 people living on campus. We had 300 and something in our graduating class at Shades Valley. There were 200 people living on campus, and some of those were really weird. But I can remember sitting there thinking, there's got to be something to this, God. After our first few weeks of being there, we had some really neat prayer meetings in our dorm. We had some neat things that were showing up and going on, even with the drunk basketball players and the party time they were having, the dope in the house. I mean, we had all kind of issues there at Bethel. It was a church-related college, but there's all kind of issues that were going on. And with all that, I had an education, not just in the classroom, but an education in life. And I found that Bethel for me was a transformative moment. But let me tell you about this Bethel, and it's retro named, put it that way. Because when the writer in Genesis is looking at this, they're describing Bethel. At that moment, it wasn't described as Bethel when Abraham had this hearing from God. He heard from God. He built this altar, and this was a place between Bethel and Ai, and they kind of located right there where Bethel would be in the geographic map is. But it's not really called Bethel till later. I want to just tell you a little bit about Bethel, because Bethel is a very pivotal point for a lot of people you'll see in the Old Testament. You'll see that here he is. It said they called upon the name of the Lord. And I love this last part. It says that they actually he appeared to Abram. He said, to your offspring I will give this land. So he built an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him. There are special places that happen in your life and in my life. There are times that you're going to have those encounters with God, and it is a transformative moment. And you want to build an altar. It's kind of like when Jesus was on Mount Transfiguration and the disciples looked up there and they saw the figures of Elisha. They saw the figures. They said, let us build you some tents. Let's do something here. Let's build you a tabernacle. This is something special. And it was special. But you'll find also there are times in your life you can go back, and I can go back. Most of y'all that are having the age to you here, you can remember when Jeff State was Camp Spain. There were so many people that had some tremendous experiences there at Camp Spain. It was your Bethel. It was your transformative moment. There are people, and this is one of the things I love about church camps, is because so many young people find their callings of God, because that's a week where you just remove distractions and they get to hear from God in a very intense situation, in a very intense environment of the Word of God being pumped in them, and they get that transformative moment. Camp Spain over there where Jeff State is right now I drove through there the other day because we had something going on, a Compact 2020 meeting, and I drove back through there because you can go back up to the A-frames up in there that was built, the dormitories and stuff like that. And I was driving through thinking, well, that's where the pool was, that's where this was. I can remember many experiences there. Bethel is representative of what you see in Scripture of a God experience, a divine encounter. So when we see Bethel, which is labeled later, and you'll see it's been called the house of God, it was an altar there that Abraham built, signifying the moment he heard from God that I am going to make you a great nation. I'm going to take you who have no children, and I'm going to show you my power. Transformative moment. You'll see that he goes on and his life unfolds, and you'll see that he had the son Isaac, and then you had Jacob and Esau. Isaac had Jacob and Esau, which was a wrestling point. And Jacob's actually the one that names Bethel. Jacob's actually one that has experience, and it's a fascinating thing because here we are sitting 190 years later, not actually on the actual land. This was Mr. and Mrs. Stone's land that was bought and to get out of the flood zone and stuff. Go to our church here, and we got this land. But this land is significant for those who've had experiences here. This is your Bethel. For those of you who've had an encounter with God. You go back across the street, and a lot of you that got married in that building across the street, a lot of you had salvation experiences. Your children got saved. Children got baptized. You had significant experiences. That's your Bethel. That's some of those transformative moments. 190 years ago, you'll find where the gentleman that came back from, and you got to go to Julia's house to find that area out there where the graveyard is. And there's one of the oldest graveyards in Shelby County is out there. You got to know where you're going. Don't go trekking through Julia's yard. She's liable to shoot you. But, not really, just kidding. But you can go through Julia's yard. You can find that graveyard that's out there. But right around there somewhere was the horse barn where these guys started praying, saying, let's start New Hope Church. They started going from house to house. And they found that those prayer meetings developed into this church. And so there's a Bethel moment. There's a Bethel moment you'll find across the street. I can see many a times, and if I could go stand back over in that office and look back out of that glass door that was there, when I would look at this blank just lot out here that had just that building, and I can remember, I don't know how many times I told the Lord, I don't know how you're going to do it. I really don't. I don't have the faith to carry this thing, Lord. I don't know how you're going to build a building here. We can't afford to build a building here. I don't know. And I kept thinking someday, one day, maybe. But then I remember standing there looking, and the Lord said, it's in the ground. You got to believe for it. Okay, that sounds kind of spiritual, but that was one of those transformative moments. It says, I'm going to do something. I'm going to show you. I'll build you a debt-free building. And I was like, okay. Just start telling the people I'm going to build a debt-free building. I was like, okay. But God is doing things in our lives many, many times, and he wants to have those moments where we experience him. We experience his presence, his knowing him, and you find that this Bethel, where it gets named, and I'm going to take you to that in just a second. I wanted to show you really some of the beginning. This is the place that when your forefathers, and that's one of the things that grieves my heart, like when you guys grow up, I don't want you to leave this church. Everybody's going to go and they're going to find something that's the newest and the best and that kind of thing. But this is that moment. It's kind of like Rocky Ridge. I can go back to Rocky Ridge Church, and I can take you into the old sanctuary, and they've got Sunday schools in there now where the rooms are, and I can take you exactly to the place where I knelt down and asked Jesus Christ to come into my heart. I can take you back to the pastor's office where Milford Smith told me that I needed to know Jesus Christ, and I remember praying with him, and he just cried, and I cried, and I can take you back to that moment. There are those moments that we all have. There are those moments, and that's why I say I want our kids to be so ingrained in not just this building, but in God, in experiencing God here. That's why it's so important when we come to church. It's not just about coming and singing songs, doing our due diligence, going home. It's about meeting God and experiencing God in this place. It's about having that moment where God, you know, is speaking to you and it transforms you. Like when you're walking into a university 5 hours away from home and God says, I'm going to do something in your life. I'm going, maybe this is what's been crying out since I was 15, 16 years old. There's got to be more. Jacob is the son of Isaac, who is the son of Abraham. And you'll find him, and he picks up the story again about Bethel. And this is the place where he has his dream. And he has this time with God because he is escaping from his father-in-law, which he took some idols with him he shouldn't have, and he's getting away from his father-in-law. And then he sits down, and he puts this rock down, and it's always going back to that place. And I love it because I can go back and I can walk at Rocky Ridge. I can come here, and I can remember all the experiences that I had with God. That's a good thing. You can go back to different places in your life, and you can experience that. I can take you back to the church up there at Mount Sharon. I love going back to that place. And I love just kind of just being there on the grounds because it reminds me of what God has done. That's why I like cemeteries. I walk around at Croft-Acton Cemetery, and I remember the different ones that have had impact in my life. It's an awesome experience to me. But you find here is Jacob. He comes back to this place, I believe, in that same geographic area where Abraham had his first encounter. He's coming back to this place. He's running from his father-in-law. He's trying to get away because he's called Jacob the heel grabber, the deceiver. He has not been changed yet. There are things about him that needs to be changed. And so he's running, but God meets him here. He has this dream of this stairway to heaven, and he has this dream about this going on. And it's not as much that as God speaking to him. Said when he awoke his sleep, he thought, surely the Lord is in this place. I was not aware of it. He was afraid, and he said, how awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God, meaning Bethel. This is the gate of heaven. This was his place where he experienced God. He had a transformative moment where everything changed. We sit here 190 years later because three men had a transformative moment down by the crossroads in Montevallo, and it's taken and it's reverberated all these years. Here's Jacob is getting his life, trying to get his life in order. God's leading him to get his life in order. He said early the next morning, Jacob took a stone he had placed under his head, and he set it as a pillar, and he poured oil on top of it. He called this place Bethel, though the city used to be called Luz. He said, Jacob made a vow. He said, if God will be with me, I'll watch over me in this journey, I am taking and He will give me food and eat and clothes to wear. I will return safely to my Father's house, and the Lord will be with my God. And set up a pillar, it will be God's house. And all of it will give, I will give a tenth. In other words, He says, God, this place is going to be sacred because I have met you. I've made a commitment. It's the same area, general area, where Abraham made his commitment, said, yes, I will go. It is in this place where it's a transformative moment. He said, this is the place where God has moved. There are a lot of experiential moments in your life. There are a lot of times, and this is one thing I will always remind you of, never forget your salvation moment. Never. Do you remember when you were saved? Do you remember where it was? Do you remember when it was when God first interacted into your life? I told you mine. That's why it's important when you see in Revelation it says, do not forget your first love. You know, part of being that first love is when you fell in love for the first time. You remember that? Remember the first time I told you I loved you? My wife 29 years ago. I said I wouldn't tell another woman I'd tell her I love her until I could say, will you marry me? We were down an old bridge there on Old Rocky Ridge Road. She didn't, I think she understood the significance of that night, but I did. Because I'd never told her. But that night when I said I love you, I knew it was going to be a difference. And I can take you back to that moment, that time. But I can take you to the time where I said, Lord, I will follow you. This is what Abraham's experiential moment. This is when he was transformed. This is Jacob when he sits there and he says, God, I'm running for my life. But he says, if you will protect me, give me something to eat, take care of me, he says, I will serve. I will be here. He said, I'm going to make this the place that's house of God. You'll find Bethel is described many other times in Scriptures. You'll see that there's another time here in Genesis, the 35th chapter, where he says he returns to Bethel. Now, here's what I want you to hear today. There was a fellow, Henry Blackaby. He wrote a book about experiencing God. This is what we in the Protestant church, it's not just about coming to an institution, but it's about having those experiences with God. That's why in the Christian life, it's not just about academics here, it's about a transformed here. It's about everything. It's about what you hear in Scriptures being transformed. That's why when we walk out of here, it's got to be livable. It can't be just something we experience here. It's not just something that we have this okay, we all are in agreement here, and it doesn't make any difference on the outside. This is let me just call it a Bethel experience that God wants us to have that transforms us, that makes a difference, that it's the house of God. That's why so many churches you'll see named Bethel. Bethel Baptist, Bethel Presbyterian, Bethel New Bethel. It's the house of God. It's that place where the gate to heaven, it's that experience with God. Henry Blackaby, when he wrote his series on, and it ended up being a discipleship series and everything, but it was like this, just let me describe to you this experiencing God. That's the way our Christian life should be. Each day of our life should be experienced, should be transformative every day. Here's how those moments work a lot of times. And you can see here in Genesis 35th chapter, I'm staying with this Bethel theme all the way through, but you'll see this is that divine encounter that God starts speaking his word. He said, here's Jacob in 35th chapter. It says that he's the heel grabber, the deceiver. He's this person that God was changing. Then he said to Jacob, go up to Bethel, settle there, build an altar. In other words, go back to the place where you promised you were going to follow. Go back to this place that I can transform you. He gave him directions. God told me to go to Bethel. That was college, not this Bethel. Didn't understand why, didn't understand the call to. I am here today serving God in this capacity, I believe, because of that decision in 1978. You say, what does that matter? It matters everything. I tell you as young people, the decisions you make today will matter when you get to be my age. That's why it's important to make wise decisions. Dumb decisions follow you just like good decisions lead you. Every one of us in our life, we've had those times, those experiential moments. God will speak his word to us. In other words, he'll speak to us through his word. Do not ever, hear me on this. I came from Pentecostals. I was in a Pentecostal church. They a lot of times would say, experiences can trump the word. It does not. If your experiences cannot be found and based in this, your experiences can be mystical, and it can lead you astray. I'm telling you that because I've seen it happen. There's nothing wrong with experiences. There's nothing wrong with the Pentecostal experiences. But it's not the end in itself. The word transforming us, God's speaking it. It better be backed up in here. There better be something you can say, well, that's backed up here. It's like that friend of mine says, I'm going to move to Texas. And I said, why are you moving to Texas? I felt like God's leading me. And finally, when I unlayered that thing, and it broke my heart. He was going to live with a girl in Texas because he was lonely. And he was using God as cover. He said, I feel like God's leading me to go. And finally, I was helping him load up the truck, and I was like, you're moving in with a girl out in Texas? Yeah. Where's that in the Word? Where's that okay? Well, I'm lonely, and we were friends years ago, and okay, that ain't God. My alarm went off, and I was like, that isn't God. And I'm bad about being blunt. That's sin, right? And so he never spoke to me again. I don't know why. I was young. I've gotten a little more diplomatic in my older age. But I do find that experiences are one thing, but then it's got to be spoken the word. Here's God speaking to Jacob. He's saying, I want you to go back to Bethel. Go back to that place to where you're going to find that I'm going to speak to you. And he says, go up there, build an altar. In other words, get ready for me. Anytime that you are in a place of question or transition, this is what God is going to do. He says, I want to take you to a place. And you say, well, why does that matter? You don't have to go to a geographic place, but I have found there are times when I go to that geographic place because God will tell me, he says, Donny, I want you to go here, and I want you to just sit there and be quiet. I'm going, ooh, that's hard. And sit still and be quiet. I'm going, that doesn't make any sense, God. I've got 14 decisions to make. Go sit down and shut up. Now, I'm as obedient as I was to my mama. Not really. Probably am as obedient as I was to my mama. I didn't always go down, sit down, and shut up. But I have found that God started appearing to him. He said, there, God, who appeared to you when you were fleeing from your brother Esau. In other words, when you were running for your life, when you needed somebody to speak to you, I was there. Go back to this place. I'm going to speak to you again. Is the physical properties as important today and time? No, the obedience is important. When you hear the voice of God, the obedience. Because you can argue all day long and say, God, can't you just speak to me here in my kitchen? I can, but I'm asking you for a heart of obedience. I want you to go here. And I'm going, but God. It's like the time I was praying over here when I was pastoring this church. No, I was pastoring in Palms Rock. I was pastoring, associate pastor there, praying hard for a person, and God said, I want you to go pray for him. I said, God, I don't have time. They're all the way up in Tennessee, 4 hours away. I don't have time. Now, that doesn't work with God. You understand that? I thought it would work fine with me, but that doesn't work. I said, I don't really have time. He said, but here's what I want you to do, Donny. It's not even as much about her. Is it about you? Will you obey me? Now, in the construction world, if you're not on the job, you're not getting paid. You understand that? We don't have this set salary we have in the sheetrock world. We didn't. If you're there, you make the hours, you get paid. And here's what I found. I said, God, okay, begrudgingly, I will do it, God. I don't know if y'all have ever done that, but that's just as honest as I can be. God says, I've got an experience for you, Donny, if you'll just obey my word. Now, he loved this person. He said, I want you to go pray for her. He said, and he gave me very specific instructions about that day. He says, you go, you drive up there, don't turn left, don't turn right. He said, when you get to the hospital, don't talk to anybody. Go in and pray in the prayer room for a little bit, and I'll tell you what I'm going to do. And I was like, okay. So I got there, walked in. Everybody's looking for me because they saw me coming in the parking lot. And I didn't really tell everybody I was coming. I said, I'm going to come up and pray. I feel like the Lord lead me to, da-da-da-da. And here I'm driving up, and I kept trying to turn left and right because I was wanting to do some other things. And God said, no, just go do this. Boom, 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 boom. And so I get to the hospital, pray for the amount of time he told me to pray in the hospital. And he said, well, does that really matter? Yes, it really matters. It was a specific amount of time. People come in, I mean, I had some people come in there when I was in, every hospital's got the chapel, so I was in there praying. When I got through, my time was up. He said, now go pray for her. So, okay. I went up there and prayed for her. Got through praying for her, and I thought, with all this trouble, she ought to get out of this bed. She just laid there. Didn't even know I was there. I was like, Well, God, that didn't work out too well. I thought I was going to be like the evangelist on TV. I'm going there and pray for her. She's going to jump up out of bed and say, hallelujah. And we all go off rejoicing. Well, she just laid there. He said, now go enjoy whatever you want. I come back home. I had a lady that had banana pudding waiting on me. Adamsville. Be able to eat banana pudding. Do what else I was wanting to do. He said, enjoy your day. Thank you for obeying. That lady's still alive today, just to get you wrong. She's almost 100 years old. She's still alive. She had meningitis. I said, Donny, it wasn't about you. I didn't even need you. You need me. You need me. My obedience to him is just going, God, I need you. This is all he's asking of Jacob. He's saying, you need me? Let me show you how you get me. And it's in that place of obedience. He's going to speak to us the word. But he also speaks through our experiences. Don't get me wrong. There are times that you're going to have experiences. You ever have those moments where you know God has spoken and you've tried to obey, and in those experiences you go, aha, this is God. Those experiences should back up what you've already heard. Here's Jacob. He's there. He said, and this is what God spoke to him. He says, so Jacob said to his household and to all that were with him, get rid of all the foreign gods. So God's going to come to us, and this is how he does this. When he takes us to Bethel, he speaks through the word. He uses experiences. And let me just tell you this, one other thing he uses, and he'll use people. Understand that? There are times when you're not hearing the voice of God, and all of a sudden, and it can be a very familiar person or it can be a stranger, either one. Don't forsake the teaching of your mothers and fathers, because sometimes they'll come to you and say, that ain't right. Or that's not right, if it's Mindy. I told the other day, I saw a meme on Facebook. Why do I have to choose between my friends and good grammar? So I'm like, yeah, that's right. I do find that God will speak to us through people we know. Look at David. When David had gotten so far off, he wasn't listening to the word, wasn't singing songs to God, wasn't with God. He had already committed murder, adultery, and finally, he gets a prophet there to speak in front of David. And he does it in a roundabout way. He gives him this story. And David gets enraged because that sense, he played to the sense of justice that was in David. And David says, this person ought to be killed. This person ought to be punished. And the prophet says, you're the man. So he does use people. Have you ever had that friend that's faithful to come to you and tell you when you've been dumb? I love those friends later. I don't like them at the moment. I love them later. Genesis 35. Let me give you this real quick, and we'll finish up with this. Here he is, this Bethel moment, this time where you have this encounter with God. Abraham, Jacob, you'll see that you can follow Bethel throughout Scriptures. You'll see it ended up turning into a place where, as Jeroboam took over the kingdom, he put a rival place to Jerusalem, tried to keep people from going to Jerusalem. He set up golden calves at Bethel, and it was just all wrong. And there were judgments placed on Bethel and everything else. So it can become a wrong place, but at this moment it's a right place, and it's a place where God was speaking to him. It says, so they gave Jacob all their foreign gods. When God speaks to you, he's coming to you, and when he comes, the natural thing you're going to do is to be cleansed. It said that there you were at Bethel. He's built the altar. God shows up, and he says, I want you to take all these idols that you brought from another land, take them and go bury them. Get rid of them. It says they set out. They actually said when they did this, they gave Jacob all the foreign idols and the rings from their ears. Jacob buried them in the tree there at Shechem. And it said, then they set out, and the terror of God fell on towns all around them. That's the holiness of God. Now, here's what I want you to hear today. Bethel was a place for the patriarchs in the Old Testament, you'll see, they'd go back to. Our Bethel is that transformative moment that I want you to remember. It may be that place you got saved. It may be that time where you remember God impacting your life for the first time. It could be a camp. It could be somewhere. I want you to remember that time. What was it that set that fire in your heart? It was God, an experiential moment that set a fire in your heart. Over a period of time, that fire can dull. Over a period of time, if it's not stoked and not properly assessed every day, then you'll find it goes away. You'll find that God is looking for us to experience him. He said, then Jacob and all the people with him came to Luz, which is Bethel, in the land of Canaan. There he built an altar. He called the place El Bethel, which is that house of God, meaning the God of Bethel, meaning God of this house. They built an altar. As they did that, he said, because God was there, he revealed himself to him when he was fleeing from his brother. And he said he buried Deborah, the nursemaid to Rebekah. And then you find, he goes on down here, and he says, after Jacob returned, he said, God appeared to him again and blessed him. God said, your name is Jacob, but you'll no longer be known as Jacob. You'll be known as Israel. So he named him Israel. And he goes on and sets blessing. And so he set a stone pillar in the place where God had talked to him. And he poured out a drink offering and poured oil on it. And Jacob called this place where God had talked to him Bethel. Where is your Bethel? Here's what I would tell you. If you want a Bethel in your life, it's not a geographic place. It can be. If you want a Bethel in your life, I want to tell you this. God is always speaking. Whether we're always listening or not, that's the problem. God spoke to Abraham. He spoke to Isaac. He spoke to Jacob. God is always speaking. What is he speaking to you today? Now, he has to speak through the clutter. Because the clutter, when he's speaking, usually when he comes, the first thing it's going to do is hit your heart like it did with Jacob. He says, go and get all the idols out of your life. Get the junk out of your life. That's where you're going to clear up the hearing. He said, get the idols out of this family. Go bury them. Get rid of them. Let's become something different than what you are. Usually when God speaks, it brings about a holiness. It brings about a change in us. And it's scary when God shows up. Secondly, it's usually a time where he is wanting to speak, not the transformative moment in time, but he's wanting to speak to us in order to make an impact for generations to come. That's what Bethel was all about, was making an impact for generations to come. And lastly, let me tell you this. I am so grateful for the 190 years that this church has had in existence. But the only way we're going to ensure the next 190 years, the next generation, is to make sure we are experiencing God on a daily basis, that we are being transformed on a daily basis. That's what made a difference to start this church. That's what's going to make a difference till Jesus comes, is that we make a difference. And we let God transform us from the inside out, having that Bethel transformative moment. And I do not take it lightly, and I can clearly remember those glass doors at Bethel University, Bethel College at the time. I still remember those glass doors and God speaking. And as I stand here before you today, it's his faithfulness, not mine. It's him asking, will you let me transform you? Still, this old boy, he said, I want to continue to transform you. But we have got to experience God and allow his transformation to take place. If God is speaking to you today, here's what I want you to do as we sing this closing song. If I can pray with you, agree with you. There's something, if God's saying, okay, here's what I need to change about you, then a lot of times your Bethel moment is, okay, God, let me submit to you what I'm hearing. And that's why I have altar calls. Let me submit to you. What am I hearing? And as I submit to you, you know what's going to happen? You're going to hear more. God's going to speak to you more. He's going to give you directions. You say, well, it's the way it works. It's the way I've seen it. It's the way I see it in the Word. Let's stand together. Father, I thank you for Bethel, the house of God, this place of God, this gate to heaven, the invitation you give us, Lord, to experience you on a daily basis. I'm grateful for that. May our encounters with you be fresh, be new. Thank you for the history that we have as this church. Thank you for the history we see in scriptures that lead us and direct us. But Father, I know it's about your story you're still writing. And you want us to experience that fullness of you each day. If you're tired, you're weary, come to Bethel. Come have a Bethel experience. The power of his Holy Spirit. Let's sing together. God bless as we go from this place. And may we be that transformative agent of people and change around us because you are transforming us. And Lord, may this place be the house of God, the place where we meet you and are transformed. And Lord, I thank you for Bethel. I thank you for each time that you meet with us, that you can change us and make us new. And so, Father, I pray, and then today, as we walk out of this place and come in contact with this community, that we will introduce them to a God who is still interacting with mankind today through your Son, Jesus Christ. Thank you for that, Father. In the name of Jesus, amen. God bless. Have an awesome day. Wish my son a happy birthday.